Hey everybody, welcome to Get to Know Your Wedding Pro. My name is Reed with Best Made Videos. We are a wedding videography company based out of West Seattle, Washington. And I'm so excited today to be joined by Stephanie Clarke, hot and fresh off her Best Made Weddings podcast appearance on our wedding invitation kind of frequently asked questions video. I just posted it this morning. And it's getting a lot of great feedback. So Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Stephanie Clarke. I am the owner and designer of Chloe Clarke, The Art of Paper. We are a design and letterpress studio focused on bespoke designs for weddings and events. And we're based in Seattle's Portage Bay neighborhood, which, if you're unfamiliar with, it's a little neighborhood in between Montlake and Eastlake, kind of overlooking the University District. And we have a great little consultation studio there where we meet with our clients and where our 3 antique letterpress printers live.
That's awesome. And I'm so excited. I always get excited to bring on, paper people with stationery, all those sorts of things. My wife, is such a card person. And I was saying on the round table, it has really brought that appreciation back to us. I never really grew up in our family, just wasn't one of those families. And, in the 8 years we've been together, it's amazing how much she cherishes that and sends notes to her friends and stuff. So I always appreciate, kind of the work that you guys do. And I think that it's great. And I think it's so important, for weddings and everything else, but so I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So talk to me about, you have quite an extensive background. I was looking at your website, lots of experience. How did you get involved in all this originally? What inspired you?
Sure. So I come from an art and design background. I studied art history in school. That's what I had my degree in. I also have a degree in interior design. So I actually entered into the design world as an interior designer. I actually worked for Starbucks for a number of years as one of their designers on their international team. And then I kind of transitioned from interior design to graphic design and went to work for a retail branding firm here in Seattle, where I did everything from environmental design to interiors, lots of signage, websites, kind of all things design oriented in creating a retail environment and branding. And then during that time, I just really felt like I needed to get my hands on something and get back to drawing and illustrating, and kind of on a whim took a letterpress class and fell in love with heavy metal machinery. And shortly thereafter moved a 1,000-pound printing press into my basement and started a business. And it kind of grew organically from there over a long period of time. But that was kind of the roots of all of it.
And so we were talking before we recorded, you live in West Seattle, not far from where we are. Are you from the area? Mm-hmm. Did you grow up here or did you come?
No, I'm actually from Southeast Alaska. So I grew up in Juneau, the capital, and lived there until college. And then I moved to Washington and went to school at Western Washington University in Bellingham, and then moved to Seattle. So I've been here now almost the same amount of time that I lived in Alaska. So I'm kind of half and half Washingtonian Alaskan.
And what was it, that led you into that studies in school? What was it about the design and everything?
Yeah, I've always had a pretty artistic background. When I was younger, I was much more involved in performing arts, music, and acting, dance. And then when I went to college, I just kind of shifted a little more internally to painting and drawing. And I've always been an avid doodler. And it just kind of naturally happened. But then I wanted to study artists and architecture. My focus in college was architecture with art history. And so that's kind of what led me to interior design. And then from there, I really discovered that the best thing about interiors was when I was presenting them and creating my presentation boards. So that's kind of how I ended up in the graphic world. It just was kind of an evolution. I've always lived somewhere in the arts, and I have a real appreciation for that side of things. So this just kind of naturally came about. And then when I discovered invitations and, letterpress printing, it just was like the perfect marriage of the two things. And I've just really found a home there.
Yeah, kind of entering in, to the world of weddings and everything else. I've said before on the podcast, knew absolutely nothing. When I kind of went in from, I was doing video and then got into just this whole world of everything involved in weddings. Were you comfortable entering into that space? What was it like, kind of making that transition?
Yeah, it was interesting. When I first purchased my letterpress, I don't know that I really planned to start a business. It was more kind of a hobby, but anyone who's ever played with a letterpress or tried to have one as a hobby realizes very quickly it's a very expensive hobby that comes with a lot of equipment and supplies. And because letterpress is so labor intensive in the setup, it really doesn't justify using one unless you're making multiples of something. So you put all this time and effort into getting it ready. You need to print 100 of something. So it lends itself very well to invitations and things that you're making, large quantities of. And so I got the letterpress and was, just making some custom stationery here and there. And at the same time, a lot of my friends were getting married. So they would ask me to produce their invitations. And it just kind of went from there. And I started a website and had a portfolio and started taking client meetings. And all of a sudden I had kind of a side gig. So I was doing all of that work while still working at the retail branding firm I was at. So I would go to work all day, work on environmental design, and then I would come home and I would do these invitations and print all night and then go back. And I did that back and forth kind of side hustle thing for about 6 years before I finally decided this needed all of my attention and focused solely on my business.
What was it like making that transition finally? Was that a scary thought?
Yeah, so I should probably back up a little bit. My business actually started under the name Dahlia Press, which is still very much in existence. When I started it, it was, again, really focused on invitations. I left my job as a designer at a retail branding firm, and I started a line of greeting cards for wholesale, as well as retail. And it really took off right away and became a great source of revenue. So I quickly discovered that I didn't have space in my basement that my business was now allowing me. Because unlike weddings, which are all very custom, and you can do projects kind of on a one-off basis, and you don't need to have a ton of supplies. With a wholesale line, you have to have inventory. So I very rapidly outgrew that space and ended up moving into a retail space where we were able to buy more presses and have an inventory of all of our product line. And so for the last 5 years, I had a retail storefront for our greeting cards. And then that's also where we would meet with clients for weddings. And I was doing everything under the name Dahlia Press. But what I discovered was as my greeting card line grew its own aesthetic, the wedding industry didn't really tie in with that aesthetic. And I was having a really difficult time marketing myself on both platforms, marketing to retailers who needed to buy my cards versus brides and grooms looking for invitations. So this last fall, we decided to kind of divide the company into two and created Chloe Clarke, the Art of Paper, which is focused entirely on the wedding and event invitation side so that Dahlia Press can stay just a greeting card company.
No, I think that's so interesting. It's hard. It's a lot of businesses struggle with that. Whatever kind of type of service it is, video or otherwise, to kind of balance that. I know a lot of like videography companies have difficulty balancing between like doing corporate work and marketing for that,
Mm-hmm.
and then doing wedding stuff. And so it's interesting that you ran into that same question where you were trying to do, your pressing and then also, the invitations and kind of balance the two. Was that a difficult decision to have that spin off, or did that just make logical sense to you?
It was ultimately, it made logical sense. And it was something that I internally struggled with for years. Honestly, as soon as we released the wholesale line, I started to have this debate of how do I position myself in the market to brides and grooms versus position myself in a market for retailers. One of our our best-selling greeting cards has an illustration of breasts, and it says "You're the tits." And so we have become very well known for this card. I'm embarrassed to say how many thousands we've sold of those. But when a mother of the bride goes to my Instagram or website and she sees that card, it doesn't really sell me very well when it comes to, okay, I want my daughter's really beautiful custom high-end invitations. Can you make those too? So it made a lot of sense to separate those two things. That way the greeting card line could be fun and playful and cheeky and sassy, and the wedding invitations could be the really luxurious custom bespoke designs that we've been creating for years. But they just definitely have a different aesthetic than the greeting cards. So it made sense logically. It made sense aesthetically. It's made our social media much more clean and easy. Also, the voice that we can use when we're talking about the brands and on social media platforms and websites, et cetera. It streamlines both brands. Yet everything is still done under one roof. We still live in one space. It's all done, within the same retail area we're in right now. However, we've actually closed the retail store. It's now just for consultations for Chloe Clarke. But yeah, so one company, two different sides.
That's interesting. I talk with a lot of different, vendors on here, and there's always the debate about, the artist that doesn't necessarily have the marketing side, or it's difficult, right? Because not everybody that's a business owner, right, is maybe you just want to take photos or whatever. But obviously, you seem to have a really good grasp, right, of marketing, of voice, of brand. Did that come from just your time in retail, and how did you transition, and what was that like, being able to do it for yourself, right, and be able to have ownership of the brand that you have?
Totally. I think, I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. I've always liked working for myself. And I think naturally I have been able to market myself pretty well and market my brands. And I definitely think that my background with retail branding made a huge difference and an impact on that. The business side of things has always been a little tricky for me. I always hear my mother's voice in my head telling me to get a degree in business. And had I gone back and actually listened to her, that probably would have been helpful. But the visual aspects of things, that part I've always felt very confident in. And I think that's come naturally, as well as with the experiences I've had working for different companies.
Yeah, that would be an accounting degree or a business degree or something. It's so funny that, because when I was in news, the people would ask you, do you need to have a broadcast degree to do this? And, I have like whatever the heck it was called, broadcast studies or whatever. And it's like, no, you really need like some sort of business. Like, I guess my father-in-law, he teaches business at the community college, and like, even that, like getting like an AA or like something, it just would do. Cause I'm still, I think if anything, this kind of quarantine and really having to tighten the purse strings has really made me a lot more aware about like, profits and losses and everything, and just kind of like spending.
Totally.
But it's challenging for some, vendors, right, to be able to like, to do all that. What was, obviously your parents have to be tremendously proud of, everything you've got. What was it like telling them, hey, I'm going to start a business, or how did that go?
It was good. Ultimately, I have the most supportive family, which is wonderful. And actually, my brother works with me. He's now my main printer. I taught him how to print, and so he prints almost all of our greeting cards. So my family's super supportive. I think they were also very cautious in the beginning, though. And I started my business in 2008, and I really didn't go out into just working for myself until 2014. So it was a long time that I was doing that side hustle. And I think part of that was also just to assure them that, like, I, number one, could make this work, that there was longevity in it, but that I also was taking it very seriously and growing slowly and not making any sort of rash decisions. And then once I did make that decision and I had, savings set aside and I was ready to just go forth, it kind of blew up very quickly, which was great. It could have been disastrous. So it gave me kind of the right motivation to keep going and just keep growing.
Yeah, and I don't know if you feel the same way, because I kind of did that transition thing too, and it's when you finally, jump in and you're able to, really, you got to fill like your calendar, you got to fill your week, you got to fill the time that
Mhm.
you do. It's not like this like explosive whatever, but it is like a definitely like growth, right? Where you're like, oh my gosh, now I can really focus on all of this and all my attention.
Totally. Yeah. I feel like I constantly struggle from that fear of like, there won't be any work. And the minute I verbalize it, I get flooded with work. But I do think it's just because when you're available and you make yourself available, things come back to you. And, we've worked really hard to get the names for the brands out there and to try to get the right people on our teams and working with us and the right vendors and the right connections. And yeah, it brings in really great work that we're very proud of and happy and hopeful to keep doing for a long time.
Where you're in a more unique situation than I am, where you can work, remote, people wherever. Do you find that where do you find the majority of your clients are coming from? Is it the Seattle area, or have you really been able to kind of get that brand out there like you want to?
Yeah, I would say for our custom clients for the wedding world, we're probably 60-40, 60% Seattle or, in the area. And then the other 40% is really international. I mean, we are working with clients all over the US. We normally do a couple weddings in either France or Italy a year. This year I have one in Iceland. So it is nice that we get to, kind of meet with people, even if we're not meeting with them one on one from all over the world. And yeah, really, we don't have to actually physically meet with anyone in order to do the work. It's so great now with technology. We can do like a Zoom call or a FaceTime and, just between emails. And then we normally ship out a sample package. But that's kind of all we really need to do in order to work with someone.
Do you find that there's a big difference in design aesthetics, everything, people that are doing it in Seattle versus elsewhere? And how do you enjoy that, that challenge, or what is that like? Because like all of, we're like Seattle, like we're pretty like meat and potatoes, like videography, like we're just local here,
Mhm.
like that is what it is. And, even for like, videographers or whatever that do stuff, internationally, there's difference, right? I mean, what is that like for you to kind of balance those?
I wouldn't say that the design aesthetics are vastly different. I think design, kind of changes with time. So there's definitely going to be trends that are more popular today versus tomorrow. That'll be across the board. But I do notice in the Pacific Northwest, we definitely have a color scheme. We do lots of greens and lots of navy blues, browns, and there's typically, or a lot of time, imagery that's very specific to the Northwest, some mountainscapes, trees, definitely things that are specific to the area that we don't do in other areas. But on the flip side, there's, I'm sure trends in other parts of the country or the world that, other designers would say that we're so sick of always using the color red and always illustrating the same flower. So I think it kind of just depends on where you live.
Do you find, and part of this goes back to our conversations on the round table talking about custom, being able to work with someone. Do you find like that the people that come to you already know the benefits of working with someone like you to do everything, or do you feel like you have to educate them about why it might cost a little more, but obviously the
Mhm.
work and the customization's a lot more. I don't know, right? Where you're in that position, do the people that find you are already set up for that, or do you find you educate a lot?
Um, Ultimately, we end up educating quite a bit. I think that there is a client that is specifically looking for a custom design. And so they know that they're searching for someone like me that is a custom stationer, that we're going to start this process from scratch, from nothing. And we're going to go through picking a palette and a style and fonts and illustrations. And you're really going to walk away with a completely unique piece. Versus there's a group of clients that just really want to work with someone local. And so for that, we definitely get people who are like, I don't really care if it's an off the shelf design or not. I just really want to work with a local stationer. And that can be problematic because, yes, we are local, but we still are offering a custom design, which is a more expensive price point. And then there are certainly the people who are comparing us to online competitors that are looking for just a completely off the shelf, pre designed collection. And again, we have to educate them that that's not really what we offer.
Yeah, it's tough, especially when people can look online or find stuff on all the different minted or whatever. I think I mentioned this on the roundtable too. It just can't be said enough. Like even with the logos and stuff that we do for the podcast, and we have flyers and stuff. And I have a guy that I met. Well, I've never even met him. Online. He lives in like Bosnia or something. I mean, I've never. Right. We just do everything online. But it's so nice to be able to like have a new idea or need to change something, and he has like all the fonts and the colors and the things, and like I don't have to like try to explain anything, and it's got to be the same, right, when you're working on like your wedding suite, invitation suites or whatever, or just to have all that stuff and be able to make it bigger or smaller, or make a copy of it with something else. And especially like we were talking with having to do like I thought was really important in the roundtable was talking about sending custom save the dates for like if you need to do a smaller guest count for immediate family, and then do a different like invitation or whatever for guests, and how much easier that would be to have someone like you that could just do that in 30 seconds as opposed to having to like rebuild everything. Do you want to talk about just that?
Yeah.
Just kind of that process?
Totally. I think that that's a really good point about the ability to customize things with a custom stationer. One thing we get a lot of debates on, we get people who come in and first of all, they just don't know how to even get started with their invitations and what are the pieces that go into it and how does it really work. It seems like such a simple thing. We've all received invitations before, but when you really break down what needs to go in there, it can be a lot more complicated. And for us, we'll have clients who are trying to juggle multiple day events. So they'll have welcome parties and rehearsal dinners, and they'll have, a brunch, and they'll have lots of meet and greets, and trying to juggle not only fitting all of that into an invitation suite, but then also replies for all of those things, because maybe some guests are getting invited to one half of the wedding weekend and the other half's getting invited to the whole wedding weekend. So when you work with a custom stationer, we can really curate everything to fit those pieces and what exactly you need. That is where it can be very difficult. If you were to just go online, you're really stuck with what they present you with, and you can't make those specialized choices. And as a stationer, it is our job to kind of handhold you through that process and walk you through your own weekend and say, okay, as a third party, here's where I have questions. And so how do we help explain those questions to your guests? Because they're going to have questions. So it's a very customized process.
Yeah, I do think people get really, you get in your head about, well, this makes sense to me, right? And I know what's going on. And with anything, it's so nice to have that outside, expertise and be able to, ask the questions that, as the bride and groom or whatever, you're like, well, we know that's because we've talked about it for 15 hours. And you're like, well, yeah, but not everybody has necessarily talked about it as long as you have.
Exactly. I think it is very hard for people to get out of their own heads. And you're completely right. They have gone through the weekend so many times and they're like, well, this completely makes sense. And I'm sure everyone just knows naturally, but they really don't. And a lot of times people are really relying on their websites to explain those details to their guests, which is great. The website is a wonderful tool, but unfortunately, it just doesn't get the same sort of traffic that it should when it comes to weddings. Guests are still very used to going to the website the weekend before the wedding and just looking for your registry. And really, that is the number one thing that they're there to do and there to look for. And they're going to miss all those other little details if they're not included in the invitation suite. It's hard to ignore them when it's literally on a magnet on their fridge and they can see like, oh yeah, we actually need to be there 2 days before we thought we did. And if they just had to rely on the website for that information, they wouldn't know.
Yeah, that's actually really true. I hadn't even thought about that because we, like, for our wedding clients, we always have them put their wedding website. And if there's any like details or whatever, I'll put it in like the blog or whatever. And it's always funny that I'll go in like after the wedding but pull up the website and they still would have never like updated everything. Like it still is like under
Mhm.
construction and they've already gotten married now. And you're like, man, yeah, it's just these couples think that, oh yeah, I'll just put everything on there. And it's that invitation and it's, having it on the fridge or on the, on the cupboard or whatever. I don't know. It's such a cool part. I know I said on the roundtable, we have 5 or 6 invitations still from past weddings, including our own, on the fridges, because Dorothy likes to look at that stuff and remember, kind of all the fun times.
Yeah, no, we definitely work with clients who really love paper, and there are people out there that really cherish these pieces. They are keepsakes for them, and I think unfortunately too often paper is underrated, and it is one of those things that means a lot to a lot of people. And I also tell our clients all the time that for the guests that can't attend your wedding, whether it be the travel or COVID, the invitation is the only thing they'll actually receive. Not everyone is on Facebook and wanting to go through albums to look at all your wedding photos. So they may never see photos of your big day. If they're not there to enjoy the food and the dancing, they're missing out on all of that. But they do get the invitation, and some of them will keep them for a long time. And I know this because a lot of brides bring in old invitations that they have received to go over and to use as examples. So I know there's always that theory of, everything gets thrown away or recycled, and that's really not always the case.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and I don't want to trigger any outlandish responses. But what if I'm someone and I just want to, send a digital thing, and I just want to send a link or whatever? What's your sales pitch? How do you educate, and what is your thoughts on that? Because I know that that's something that obviously people ask you guys.
Sure. It's definitely not something that I would necessarily specialize in. So if someone was to come to me and say, we just want a digital invitation, ultimately I would end up telling them that I'm probably not the best fit for them and give them some resources that they should look for or look to. But, honestly, we'll go through the importance of why people should get invitations, physical invitations. And one of the biggest things is there is a certain demographic that is just not used to receiving invitations via email or on a website. If we had to send those out to my parents' generation or their parents' generation, there's just no way. Those people would never know about the event. So an actual physical piece means a lot. It also really sets the tone for your day. It shows a lot of care, a lot of thought. You also get to kind of tease your guests with the look and feel of your wedding and get them excited about it. I also tend to personally believe that the nicer the invitation, the more that your guests might dress up, the more they might spend on a gift for you. If they feel like they're going to a really lavish affair because it's made on quality paper with a really expensive printing process and it feels luxurious and special when they open it, they're going to step it up. They're not just going to show up in jeans and a Hawaiian shirt to your wedding. So there is a level of formality that goes with the invitation that I think is important.
Our friends got married in, gosh, was it? Well, I guess 2 summers ago now, but they got married in Italy. And when we got, it was, I don't know, 40 people or whatever when it was like a destination thing. But when we opened that invitation, my wife's jaw dropped, because and we were like, wow, this is like, we knew this was going to be a nice wedding, but we're like, this is like really, really nice, because like you said, it totally does. Sets the stage. And then got like super excited and we were like, wow, like we had no idea that it was going to be like, we felt so lucky, right, that we got to be invited to this. And it was purely because of the quality of, the invitation that they sent us. I mean, it was crazy.
Absolutely. I think if you were to be invited to attend an award show, like go to the Oscars, you would be kind of disappointed if it showed up in an email and you were expected to walk the red carpet. Like you would want something really beautifully delivered to you to justify going out and getting a new outfit and getting dressed up and putting your night aside to attend this. And so an invitation gets people excited.
Yeah. Also, when you talk about the digital, we do enough like get-togethers and try to send like Facebook invites and stuff. And even among like our friend groups, it's not they're, oh yeah, I didn't even see that. Right. And I mean, let alone, when you're trying to invite everybody of all ages and it's, people just and if you're on it, you're really on it, but not everybody is as, in tune with all that online stuff.
Yeah, I think that's also a really good point. When it comes to online invites, like a Facebook invite or an evite, it is much easier to not follow through with attendance. It's very easy to say, yeah, sure, maybe we'll come to your barbecue on Sunday, and then never go, never send a follow-up message or a call to say like, hey, we're not actually going to make it. It just feels like a lighter, less specific thing that you have to go to, where when you receive a physical invitation with a physical RSVP card and you have to say like, yes, we are attending, or no, we are not, chances of you actually skipping out on it last minute are very unlikely. Most likely, if you're going to actually send back in that RSVP card, it is with the plan of attending. So I do think, a lot of times we get couples who will want the physical invitation and maybe a details card, but they'll want to leave out the RSVP and they'll want to send people to a website to reply. And I always try to encourage people not to do that for a multitude of reasons. But that is a big one, that there's just not the same level of follow through with an RSVP online.
How did you guys handle the invitations and other things, design elements for your guys' own wedding, and how did that go?
Yeah, so luckily my husband and I had a very small wedding. We only had about 35 of us, which included the two of us. It was really tiny. And so I decided to make our invitations, and we actually got married at a whiskey bar. So we had a very unconventional wedding, and we wanted kind of a speakeasy feel. And so I hand dyed paper to make it look aged, which was quite the process. And I will never forget the night my husband came home from work and there was paper like hanging from the ceilings everywhere drying. And I was like, just do not touch it. And so, yeah, I had hand dyed, hand stained paper, and then I had to iron it and like book press it to flatten it back out and letterpress it. It was exhausting and beautiful. I, of course, would change a million things about it now, years later. But at the time, it was, a masterpiece.
That sounds awesome. Do you still have a copy of one of those? Do you hold on to it?
I do. Yeah. And then again, like I look back at it and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have gone with this font instead, or maybe changed that. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a fun little suite. And we even had, because it was such a small party, we had these little tiny envelopes that had a password inside of it that the guests had to give at the door. So it was very personalized. And the password was a password that we were given when we went to a speakeasy on the first vacation we took together. So that was a sweet thing. We incorporated vintage postage, which is a big thing that I do today. But because I am a designer and a letterpress printer, I found vintage postage of antique letterpresses, and my husband's an architect. So we found vintage postage of architecture. So that was all very personalized. And I think that's kind of one of the great things about invitations and working with a custom stationer is you can add those little details with a custom suite that you just can't get online. A lot of times we'll incorporate illustrations of people's pets into their invitation suite, or we'll do a monogram that's really personal for some, story that the bride and groom share. And maybe sometimes it's only something that the bride and groom know, and it's kind of an inside joke, but we can find ways of incorporating that and making it really special so that, 10, 20 years from now, they can look back and remember that they incorporated these little personal details.
Yeah, when we got married at Salty's in West Seattle, and so we had the skyline, that was going to be, that obviously that you were going to see from the wedding, but also that we used to live by there and walked our dog on there every day, right? And so that was was kind of the whole. But it was just really nice to feel like I had said on the round table, the invitations and the chalkboards and stuff, that was really the only custom stuff. We didn't do a lot of like custom. We had like a DJ and stuff, but we didn't have, that was the one thing that we spent a lot of time on was, the paper products, and then like a couple, I guess, chalkboard or like the greeting sign or whatever you call that. But that was, really important to us. I was going to ask, and you listed some of them. What are some of the trends now that people are really doing on theirs? You mentioned the dog or the pet thing. I think that's obviously one, but what are some other trending kind of things right now that you see with those?
Totally. So wax seals have made a huge comeback. And not just, your typical dark red wax seal. We see them in a variety of colors, or even translucents, which are kind of exciting and fun to play with. And new materials. So acrylic and leather, velvets, like we can incorporate all sorts of different materials into an invitation suite. It doesn't just have to be paper. We've also done lots of things with interesting ways of mailing or presenting the invitations. So for one couple earlier this year who also was having a very tiny wedding, we actually had these custom made boxes that were wrapped in linen and had their monogram on it, and they hand delivered their invitations to their guests. So you can do things that are really unique. We've done acrylic photo albums as invitations. So yeah, I mean, the trends are kind of all over the place. Luckily, we live in a time that you can do all sorts of really unique, interesting things. We can play with wood veneer, and I've even letterpressed on wood veneer. So yeah, the options are kind of endless, which is great and makes for a lot of fun. Always makes for a good design challenge.
Yeah, because that's the thing. I mean, I think people obviously think about, paper and invitations, but you're not limited to just that, right? I mean, there's a wide, I mean, it's really kind of your mind, why, or what, I don't know, there's no endless possibilities.
Totally. Even a year ago, I was working on an invitation for a 60th birthday party that was going to be in Napa. And we didn't end up doing it. But one thing we went back and forth on was having the invitation engraved on wine bottles and shipping the wine bottles to the guests. And so, I mean, yeah, the options are really limitless. And it does not have to just be the typical paper invitation. Now, that being said, as a paper lover, I am always going to push for at least some level of beautiful paper and letterpress incorporated into it. But it doesn't have to be limited to that by any means.
I was going to ask, what is, and it doesn't need to be the most, but what is one of the most favorite things you've ever put together like that creatively that you really felt like, really stretched maybe your, to get it going, or that you thought was really exciting or different or unique? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah. I had a couple years ago who was getting married in Sweden. And they came to my studio and we had a consultation, and it was a very typical consultation other than, they didn't want anything that felt overtly wedding. They didn't want to use, lots of scripts or really traditional fonts. They wanted it to be a little more modern and unique. And they really wanted everything to be in black and gold. And they also wanted to present their guests with like an interesting, unique experience because they were asking everyone to travel to Sweden for their wedding. And so that was actually the one where we did an acrylic album, and it was a photo album that had vintage photo corners, so that when people were traveling in Sweden, they could print out their photos and put them back in the album. And the invitation suite was incorporated into the album. But the unique part was right before they left, they made sure to tell me that the design was really up to me. However, it had to incorporate snakes. And I am not a fan of snakes. And so I had to have them pause and come back. And I was like, really? Snakes is in the animal? And so that was my challenge. And I spent the weekend drawing snakes. And actually, we came up with a stunning invitation. It's on the website. I'm super proud of it. I am so thankful that they went with my first draft because I did not want to continue drawing snakes. But yeah, it was definitely a little bit of a design challenge and really perfect for them. And it meant a lot. And I, will never have an opportunity to create something quite like that again. But it was very special.
I think that's awesome with the album and being able to put the photos and stuff in. I think that's such a cool, building your own keepsake or whatever. I think that's such a wonderful idea.
Totally. It was very interesting and really cool.
I always ask this for any vendor type. What are some common questions? We talked about, obviously the digital versus the tangible, but what are some other, questions that you find that you're, obviously educating people a lot on? We talked a little bit about the cost of, working with custom, stationer, but what are some things, just that you feel like you're always kind of answering just to kind of get out to answer on audio form?
Sure. Definitely the logistics of the wedding. There's a lot of figuring out, again, what are the details you need to share on your invitation? How are you relaying to your guests, especially guests that are having to travel, how they're getting to and from different venues and how that's getting incorporated into the invitation? A lot of information has to go into the reply card, which is actually a very small card. So it's hard to get all of that tucked into place. But yeah, having to kind of go over what needs to go on that, how you're managing, taking food orders, if that's something that you're needing to do because you're not having a buffet, you're doing more of a plated dinner. So a lot of just the technicalities of the weekend and going through and how things work with the invitation suite. And then, of course, price is always a really big one, and going through the difference between the printing processes and why one costs more than the other, because not all printing processes are created equal. And, how to allocate price accordingly. Timeline is a huge one that we go over. I don't think a lot of people realize just how much time needs to go into a custom suite, not only for the production of, but then the design of. The design alone can either go very quickly, depending on if it's a pretty simple suite and the client has a real clear vision of what they want, or it can be very complicated and we can go through multiple drafts and illustrations. And I've certainly had clients who halfway through the design process have kind of changed their mind on what they were looking for. And so then we have to start over. So getting those timelines just right to where they work with their calendar and my calendar, and we're giving each other enough time to get through the whole process. That's a big one.
Yeah, I think it's so fulfilling, to go through that process and work with someone, like I said, with a lot of the logo stuff that I do. I am probably the worst client in the world for, not having a vision, putting something down, immediately changing that, or getting, almost to the end, totally changing it. On the best made weddings, the dumb little microphone, I can't tell you how many times we went back and forth about, so it is, I think, like you said, people need to really just know, the time that goes into that, but then also just how fulfilling that is to feel like, it's really your voice, and it's something that it's different. It's different than, like we send out cheap, like Christmas cards every year and we just get something online. And, it's so different than really working with someone and really feeling like you created it, even though you didn't necessarily do it right. You worked with someone that was a lot more talented that created it. But you do feel like you're like, oh, wow, like we did that, and it's a really, I think it's a really cool process. And also it probably gets you ready for compromises in marriage, just having to work through that stuff with your partner anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is one of the things I love most about the consultation process. And unfortunately, that's kind of the piece that gets missed when we have to do consultations over Zoom or, with people who are far away. But when they can come into the studio and we can actually sit down and go through all the samples, and I can get out sketch paper and we can literally start sketching out what this is going to look like. They just get so excited because they're seeing this vision that they didn't even necessarily realize they had come to life. And I think that that's such an important part of creating your wedding and starting to create those visuals, because the invitation is one of the first things to go out, or the save the date. You really get to start taking those pieces of your Pinterest board or your mood board that you've created and actually see them actualized on a piece of paper. And that's such an exciting experience. And I do think it just lends itself to that really personal touch that unfortunately people do miss when they go with an online printer who's already, established a design for them.
Well, I'll tell you, we've definitely had a couple of the same generic save the dates come in the mail, that they've used the same, and we're like we literally have two of the same, and we're like, oh, okay, but it does, like you said, it sets a tone, and not that it needs to be important to everybody, but it does set a tone of oh, okay, this is it's just interesting.
Yeah, no, I definitely get clients who will call me and straight away they'll just say paper's not important to them. This isn't the part that they really want to focus on. And that's fine. And I tell clients all the time, you have to have your priority in your wedding. And I did have one bride tell me that she would rather have her expensive shoes than have really expensive invitations. And I was like, hey, if that's what's going to make you happy, then that's what you need to do. But for the people who really love that custom experience and creating something really unique to them, those are the people that come in and work with us. And it's nice, for a lot of them, we'll create a monogram or kind of a logo that they can use throughout their life. They can do it on thank you cards. They can put it on their own photo albums. I actually had one guy tattoo his monogram on him. There's things like that. It can kind of go along with you through your marriage. It doesn't have to end after the wedding day.
Perfect. This has been so great to kind of get to sit down and chat again with you after we had our wonderful roundtable. Like I said, I just think it's so important, and especially now with everything going on and scheduling weddings. In the future, I think that invitations and you guys are going to be just a lot, hopefully in a lot of demand, trying to figure out how to convey information to different people, and obviously continue to work in the future with everything like that. Before I let you go, is there anything else you wanted to touch on that we didn't talk about before obviously talking about your wonderful website and everything else on there with your designs?
No, I don't think so. I will just reiterate from the roundtable the other day. All of our 2020 couples are moving to 2021. So if you're planning a wedding, get in touch with your stationers early. Our calendars are filling up and we want to make room for all of you.
Yeah, no, we talked about that. Yeah, I think that's such a great point that you used to think, oh, I have all this time, but now with basically a whole season of weddings moving to another year, it's definitely going to put, and especially for things that are time intensive, like doing custom design, you can't, it's not something that, you can just, it's not like you just whip it up kind of thing. You need to be able to sit down and plan and kind of get a timeline going. So
definitely.
If people want to learn more about you and your website and see all your designs and testimonials and everything, where would you have them check out?
Yeah. So for wedding invitations, you can visit chloeclarkepaper.com. And on Instagram, we're at Chloe Clarke Paper. And Clarke has an E at the end of it. And then if you'd like to see our greeting card designs, you can go to dahliapress.com or at Dahlia Press.
Is Chloe your middle name?
No. So Chloe actually was my Wheaton Terrier. When I started Dahlia Press, she was there with me and she went to work at the studio with me every day. And so when we decided to divide the business and I was looking for a name, I didn't want to name it after myself. And the business she was such a big part of it. We kind of did it as a namesake for her. So Chloe was my Wheaton.
Oh, I love that. That's nice. And that'll be something that'll be with you always. I think that's
exactly.
Well, thank you again so much. This has been a lot of, you've dealt with a lot of Reed in the last couple of weeks with getting the roundtable going and this, but I think it's so great. And I do appreciate, doing the roundtable and then coming on here. And I think that doing the both podcasts now is really going to breathe some life back into the Get to Know Your Wedding Pro. Not that we needed life breathed into, but I think it's cool to get new voices and then be able to bounce back and forth and kind of do a follow-up sit down like this. I think it's great. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
This has been another episode of Get to Know Your Wedding Pro. If you're like Stephanie and you're interested in coming on a future episode of the podcast, you can go to bestmadevideos.com/podcast guest. And that's a nice, easy questionnaire I have set up to kind of get you in the system, and we can look into bringing you on the podcast. And this has been another episode. Check back next week for another wedding vendor interview. Thanks so much.